On May 12th, the NDP held a fabulous regional conference at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops. After a full day of speakers and workshop sessions, we heard this great speech by NDP leader Adrian Dix.
A special responsibility to win this election, and a special responsibility after 12 years of Liberal government, which in my view, and it's easy of course to be critical, but in my view has generally favored private interests over the public interest. And I think it's also difficult because these are difficult times to be government in a general sense, especially if you're what we broadly define as a progressive. We have trade agreements that we face that limit the scope of government action dramatically compared to, for example, what it was when the NDP last came to office in 1991, and surely what it was when we came to office in 1972. We are going to be facing contractual obligations that in 1 year recently went from $54 billion to $80 billion signed by the present government that we will be fiscally responsible for. BC Hydro, which traditionally has been both a means of economic development and a source of support for healthcare and education, has been sadly mismanaged. 27 deferral accounts that they have, which means essentially they created profit where none really existed. These are real challenges. And the fourth challenge is this, and this is why these conferences are so important. It's so important that we have the discussion together about what we need to do. I think we can't simply go backwards. That after 12 years of Liberal government, we have to take where we are now, apply our values and our ideas from where we are now, and make things better now. There are, of course, some things that have to be overturned. Everybody, I think, would agree that Bill 29, a bill that led to the largest layoff of female workers in history, of women workers in history, led to healthcare privatization, and that needs to be taken out and eliminated. And we cannot be running simply to undo what has been done. We have to take the situation that we have now and bring progress now, because people need that now. And what are the fundamental issues? And you've been addressing some of them today, and hearing these reports, we see that. Fundamental issues are, one, our economy is not growing in the way it needs to grow to sustain the jobs of the future. That's the one thing. And that is qualitative and quantitative, that question. Secondly, we're seeing dramatic increases in inequality, which risk our economy, I would argue, and risk the social cohesion that's required to make communities great places to live. We need people to have the ability, even if they are of modest means, to progress and achieve their dreams in life, and increasingly that's not happening. And thirdly, in what we think, because we're from here, and lots of people in their home, wherever they live in the world, think their own home is the best place on earth, and they should think that. We are proud, and justly proud, of this beautiful place. How can you look out at this community, or any of the communities we think around the province, and not think of what an extraordinary place it is? We have to make sure that we have a future that's sustainable, that we're passing on a province to future generations that is the province we inherited. That, after all, I think, for all of us, ought to be our core and primary responsibility. So these are the questions of our time. And as I say, the means of engagement, the means of dealing with them, are more and more difficult. And I'll add one more. It's a question of capacity, right? We have gone a long time, I would argue, in this country without what you broadly call social democratic government. It used to be that you would have the capacity to create new social programs because we were creating new social programs. We're building social innovation because there was social innovation. We're supporting environmental programs because there was environmental programs. Or using our crown corporations to build wealth in the province because we were doing that. It's been a long time since that happened. And so our means to engage in a huge and broad agenda is more limited than it used to be. Right? So we got to make choices. What do I think those choices are? You've talked about them, and you've been talking about them today. But I think it's important that we make choices. That we as a party say before the next election the things that we're going to do. Obviously, we support those. The things that we support, but we may not be able to do in the first 4 years, though we may only be able to establish the basis for that change. And then the things we're not going to do. And we have to say that before the election. I think the message of the HST is, and it's a reasonable message, that we cannot engage, we cannot say this is too unpopular to discuss in an election campaign. If it's too unpopular to discuss in an election campaign, we should not be doing it. So what does this mean? To address economic growth, I think myself that we have to start with our labor force. We have to start with our labor force and ensure that young people have the skills they need. And that's why that's been the priority so far. That's why we've talked about reinstating non-repayable student grants. That's why we focus on apprenticeships. There is an enormous gap, and this is a difference. And I remember being in a discussion early on, I said we were going to have, the Premier was thinking of calling an election last year. Then a huge issue of principle came upon the Liberal government. They dropped in the polls. And they decided not to have the election. These things happen, don't we know it? And I remember having a discussion going into that election. He said, well, what are you going to run on? I said, we're going to run on skills training. They said, no one's ever run on skills training. That's boring. But it is, in a sense, for young people, the whole shooting match. 80% of the jobs of the future require post-secondary education. And by the way, those are 80%. Those are the 80% of jobs that are the best jobs. Largely, the other 20% of jobs are not the best jobs and are not family-supporting jobs. We need young people in British Columbia to get access to those jobs. And they don't have it now. There is a major gap, which is 25% between the number of people getting post-secondary education and the number of people needing post-secondary education. You see this reflected in communities around this province where big job creation projects are happening, and we are importing labor from outside of British Columbia, often temporary foreign workers. And our federal government, by the way, has actually intervened to reduce their compensation in recent times of temporary foreign workers. Well, young people, people living, who can see the projects, who grew up around the projects, can get access to jobs in those projects. We have to give people the means of social mobility. And that means allowing people to have access to post-secondary education. This has got to be at the core of the Secondly, we can all agree that government can't do everything, that we can't afford to do everything. But we all agree that that's the case. It means that we have to ensure that those things that government does are focused on building our communities. Right? So that means big things and small things. It's so inspiring to see Steve talk about agriculture. Have you ever heard Steve talk about agriculture? It's true, I didn't know much about beet inspection until I met Steve. You know, and you think about what that means, what it means in communities, right? And what it can mean to have the government supporting local agricultural production. So this means a number of different things. It means obviously promoting it, because people in BC want to buy local when they can. And oddly, the government got rid of the program that would promote buying local. A program that cost, by the way, 1/3 of what the Premier's spending promoting herself and her jobs. Right? And using what you call government purchasing to support local communities. If we're spending money in Kamloops, if we're spending money in Kelowna, if we're spending money in Vernon, in food and hospitals, right? If we're spending money in Penticton. These are, broadly speaking, great agricultural regions. Shouldn't we be using more food, local food, in public institutions? With respect to logs, this is a big debate. Government thinks we're being naive about raw logs. They think, oh, you don't understand the way things are today. That really it makes sense to completely annihilate the manufacturing base of the province, right? In forestry. It makes sense to do that for a short-term run at maximizing profit. an option that precludes options of the future. It's as if the present circumstance of this year in the international log market should force us to annihilate our domestic industry and the opportunities people have. And forestry is important. Mining is very important. We talk about mining. I'm in support of mining. Forestry is really important for one important reason. Usually the forest jobs are much more closely connected to communities. Right? I got a bit of an issue here in Kamloops, but we'll talk about that later. The fact is, therefore, that we need to take action to make sure that we're using our logs to create jobs in British Columbia as much as we can. The Minister of Forests is from Kelowna. He's a nice guy. He's a nice guy. Oh yeah, he's a nice guy. So let's not, this isn't personal in any way. But 90 times in December and January, according to the current government's rules on log exports, and the recommendation of the current government's advisory committee on logs, they overruled that. They overruled their own rules to deny local manufacturers access to those logs. To deny local manufacturing and export them out of the country. Even the present rules, even the present surplus test that says you can only export logs if their surplus to domestic demand isn't being applied by the government. And the effect of that is to reduce the manufacturing capacity of the province right now and into the future. And we can turn that around. We can do that working with industry. We should be able to sit down with industry and say, how do we create jobs here? Instead of simply selling out our future. The jobs that we've had for generations, gone, because the government decided to pursue short-term thinking. And thirdly, we have to do something about sustaining our communities. And you know, I think that it's important to recognize, because we've had a major debate about this in the NDP. We should have debates in the NDP, by the way. I don't think that it's valuable to us that we all agree all the time. Because first of all, we don't. And I love an authentic, good debate. We, in the last election, as you know, opposed the carbon tax for many good reasons. Carbon tax essentially shifted the tax base on the working people. Why did it make sense to do that? Because every penny, not a penny went to general revenue, actually. Not a penny from the carbon tax. In fact, we subsidized it. We gave more money in tax cuts related to the carbon tax than the carbon tax brings in. Right? Corporate tax cuts, income tax cuts, and a small business tax cut. Right? An income tax cut that was received, that was capped at $80,000, but was received disproportionately by the wealthy. Right? So ironically, because any analysis of the world will tell you that those of us who have, and I'm in that category, right, use more than those of us that don't. And those of us who had benefited more from the carbon tax than those that didn't. But we can do something about that. So we're going to keep the carbon tax, but we're going to roll back some of those tax cuts related to it so we have some money to invest in communities on things such as transit. So that we're not doing at UBC Okanagan. We have people going from Vernon to UBC Okanagan and young people being left by buses on the side of the road. An entirely inadequate bus service when people are demanding that service and need that service and they're being left by the side of the road. When we have a situation in Metro and in other communities, including here in Canada, where the bus system does not meet current demand, where we cannot offer people a reasonable alternative than taking public transit as opposed to taking their car. So we can do something about that. And it involves, I think, talking to people frankly about the choices involved. So here's the final thing, and this is really controversial. What I just said, we're going to keep the carbon tax, and we're going to roll back the tax cuts, taxation levels on the corporate tax rate to 2008 levels. Right? We're going to reinstate a minimum tax on financial institutions. Right? Now, this is not not an easy debate. And we know, and you know, that we live in an open economy. We have to be kept competitive on taxation, and we will be. But I think we have to take the voters and treat the voters with more respect. More respect, but this is setting the bar way too low. More respect than current MLAs of the government party. But also with the respect to say, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to pay for it. I've been a member of the NDP for 27 years and fought a lot of campaigns. And a lot of better leaders than I have led those campaigns. They've been smarter, they've been better speakers, all those sorts of things. But in 27 years, we haven't said clearly that there is a gap between the services we need and the resources we have to pay for them. We have to meet some of that gap by addressing issues of taxation. 27 years we haven't done that, and we're going to run on that campaign in the next campaign. I think we have to take the hard road to victory. The hard road to victory is being straightforward with people about what we're going to do. The hard road to victory is saying how we're going to pay for things. The hard road is sometimes saying to each other and our friends the things that we can't afford to do right now, before the election, so that they're not disappointed. The hard road to victory, because we don't have the money, is going door to door and making our case. The hard road to victory is supporting our candidates. That's the hard road to victory. But that's the only road we're going to take. We are not going to hire a better ad agency and run better negative ads than they are. We will not do it. We are going to have a mandate to bring change to the province. And so when we win that election, people will not be surprised that skills training is a top priority of government. They will not be surprised that we're going to raise standards in environmental assessment. They will not be surprised that we're focused on transit and building the province. They are not going to be surprised when we use resources in British Columbia to create jobs in British Columbia. They are not going to be surprised when we deal with the cuts coming to healthcare from Ottawa by making our healthcare system more focused on primary care prevention. They are not going to be surprised when we say this is not the time to be attacking public school teachers. It's the time to be working with public school teachers to build a better education system together. We do this together. Together over the next year and get this right, we'll have a mandate to make things better in the province, to ensure that inequality is reduced, to ensure that the jobs of the future can go to people in BC, to ensure that we have a more sustainable environment and economy in the long run. So I ask you to join with me in this path, to contribute in policy debates, to take part in our election campaigns, to contribute in any way you can, whether it's financially or otherwise. Because we have to win this election. This community, this province is aching for change. They have decided what they think of this Liberal government. And what we have to do over the next year is show them what we're about, what we believe, what we think. And if we do that, we'll win a mandate that I think will allow us to win the next election, yes. Elect our great candidates, yes, but also have a mandate to bring the real change that our province needs. Thank you very much. Thank you.